It was a quiet Wednesday evening in the small suburban neighborhood where David Callahan lived with his wife, Emma, and their 2 children, Lily and Max. The sun had already dipped below the horizon, casting a soft, golden glow through the kitchen window. David was home from his 9-to-5 job as an accountant, his tie loosened around his neck, his briefcase resting by the door. It was the kind of evening that felt routine, comforting even, after a busy workday. But as he walked through the front door, he felt an odd heaviness in the air, something he couldn't place. "Hi, honey," Emma called from the kitchen, her voice light, yet carrying a subtle tension. "Hey, babe." "Long day," David replied as he hung his jacket on the coat rack. He made his way into the kitchen, where Emma was stirring a pot on the stove, a warm smile on her face. Dinner smelled like something hearty, roast chicken and potatoes, his favorite. But even as she greeted him with that familiar smile, something about her demeanor felt off. Emma, usually bubbly and affectionate after a long day, seemed more reserved tonight. Her movements were quick and purposeful, but there was a sharpness to her eyes that David hadn't noticed before. "Something on your mind?" he asked, pulling out a chair at the kitchen table. Emma paused, spoon in hand, and glanced over her shoulder. "What do you mean?" she asked, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. David felt a pang of unease. His wife had always been an open book, a woman who wore her emotions on her sleeve. But lately, she had become distant. Over the past few weeks, she'd been acting strange, spending more time on her phone, leaving the house without explaining where she was going, and constantly looking over her shoulder like she was waiting for someone, or something. "Nothing," he replied quickly, trying to brush off the nagging feeling. "Just, you've been different lately." "I don't know, maybe I'm just tired." Emma turned back to the stove, her shoulders stiff, as if she were relieved by his response. "I'm fine, David. Just stressed about the kids. You know how it is." He nodded, but he wasn't convinced. David trusted Emma more than anyone in the world, but something felt off, like there were layers to her that he no longer understood. As they sat down to dinner, the conversation flowed like it always did. They talked about their day, about Lily's dance recital and Max's soccer practice. But underneath the normalcy, David couldn't shake the feeling that Emma was hiding something, a secret she wasn't sharing with him. The evening passed without incident, and after dinner, they settled into the living room. Emma was curled up on the couch, scrolling through her phone, while David sat in his favorite armchair, flipping through the latest news on his tablet. The house was quiet, almost too quiet. Just as David was about to ask about the phone call he had overheard earlier, the landline rang, breaking the silence. Emma froze, her thumb hovering over the screen of her phone. She glanced at David for a split second before she quickly answered. "Hello?" David couldn't hear the conversation from where he was sitting, but Emma's body language spoke volumes. She was tense, her fingers gripping the phone too tightly, her expression unreadable. She nodded a few times, murmuring in agreement, but David couldn't make out the words. The phone call lasted only a few minutes, but it felt like an eternity. When Emma finally hung up, she set the phone down on the coffee table, her face drained of color. David looked up from his tablet. "Who was that?" Emma cleared her throat. "Just, work. A client. Nothing important." David didn't buy it. There was something in her voice, a tremor of fear or urgency, that sent a chill down his spine. He didn't press further, but his mind raced. He had known Emma long enough to recognize when something wasn't right. The rest of the evening passed in a haze for David. They went to bed later than usual, both pretending that everything was fine, but neither one of them truly believing it. As David lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. His mind wandered back to the phone call. Emma had been distant for weeks now, but this felt different. He couldn't put his finger on it, but he knew deep down that his wife was hiding something. Something big. David's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of Emma's soft breathing beside him. She was already asleep, her body curled in the familiar way she always slept. He wanted to believe that this was just a phase, that things would go back to normal. But the nagging feeling in his gut wouldn't go away. As he closed his eyes, David made a silent promise to himself. Tomorrow, he would confront Emma. He would get to the bottom of this strange behavior. But little did he know, the truth he was about to uncover would shake their world to its core. David woke up early the next morning, the sun barely cresting over the horizon. He lay in bed for a long time, staring at the ceiling, replaying the events of the previous night in his mind. The strange phone call, Emma's anxious behavior, her avoidance of his questions, it was all building up to something he couldn't ignore any longer. He had to know what was going on. With a heavy heart, David rose from bed and quietly slipped out of the room, not wanting to disturb Emma, who was still sleeping soundly. He made his way downstairs and sat at the kitchen table, sipping his coffee and thinking. Was it possible that Emma had a secret life he knew nothing about? How could he not have noticed it? He had always trusted her completely, never imagining that his wife could be hiding anything so serious. The phone call last night weighed heavily on him, and as he sat there, trying to distract himself with the morning news, a strange thought crossed his mind: what if it wasn't just a work call? What if it had something to do with Emma's past? Something she had never shared with him? At around noon, David decided to confront Emma. He couldn't go on pretending like everything was fine when his instincts were telling him otherwise. He needed answers. He found Emma in the living room, sitting on the couch, her head buried in her phone once again. She looked up when he entered, offering a smile that felt forced. "Morning," she said, but there was a hint of hesitation in her voice. "Morning," David replied. He cleared his throat, trying to find the right words. "Emma, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. What's going on? You've been acting strange for weeks now. Last night's phone call, your behavior, it's all adding up to something that I can't ignore anymore." Emma's face stiffened. She set the phone down slowly, her fingers lingering on the screen. For a moment, she didn't say anything, as if weighing her options. David could see her struggling to find the right words, but he wasn't going to back down. He had to know the truth. "David, Emma began, but before she could finish, there was a sharp knock at the door. David froze. His heart skipped a beat as he exchanged a glance with Emma. The knock was urgent, forceful. Whoever was on the other side wasn't wasting any time. "Who's that?" David asked, his voice tense. Emma's eyes darted to the door, then back to him, panic flashing in her eyes. It's no one. I'll get it." But David's instincts were screaming at him. There was something off about the way Emma was acting. She was already heading toward the door before David could stop her. His hand shot out, grabbing her wrist. "Emma, tell me the truth," he demanded, his voice hard. For a split second, Emma's expression faltered, and then, in a breathless whisper, she said, "David, I've been hiding something. I didn't want to involve you in this, but I don't know what to do anymore." Before he could respond, the door burst open and a tall, broad-shouldered man stormed into the house. His eyes scanned the room like a hawk, his demeanor cold and calculating. The man was dressed in all black, and his presence sent an icy chill through the air. David's heart raced as he stepped back, instinctively placing himself between Emma and the stranger. "Who the hell are you?" David demanded, his voice shaking with anger and confusion. The man smirked, his eyes narrowing. "I'm here for the fugitive," he said, his tone low and threatening. "And I know he's here." David's mind reeled as he tried to process what was happening. His first instinct was to grab Emma and run, but the look in her eyes told him everything he needed to know. This man wasn't just some random intruder. He was part of something much bigger, and Emma was involved. "David, listen to me," Emma said, her voice barely a whisper, but desperate. "I didn't want this. I never asked for it, but I made a mistake. A huge mistake." The man stepped forward, his gaze now fixed on Emma. "You know what happens if you don't cooperate," he growled. "You're harboring a criminal, Emma. The sooner you turn him over, the better." David's mind was racing. A criminal? His wife, the woman he had loved and trusted for over a decade, had been hiding someone, a fugitive, right under his nose? His heart pounded in his chest, but even in his shock, David's protective instincts kicked in. He stepped in front of Emma, his eyes locking onto the man's. "Who are you working for?" David demanded. "What's going on here?" The man's smile twisted into something sinister. "You really don't know, do you? You've been living with a criminal for months. And now, she's in deep. She can't run from her past anymore." The words hit David like a punch to the gut. He looked at Emma, his wife, who had always been the woman he could depend on, and saw only fear in her eyes. She was terrified, but why? Who was this criminal, and why had she hidden him from David? And most importantly, how far had she gone to protect him? "David, I didn't know. I didn't know he was like this," Emma said, her voice cracking with emotion. He came into my life years ago. At first, I thought he was just another guy. But over time, I found out who he really was, and by then, it was too late. I didn't know how to get out. I tried to protect you. I didn't want you to get hurt." David could feel the weight of her words pressing down on him. A million thoughts swirled in his mind. His wife was involved with a criminal, and now, everything they had was on the line. The man at the door wasn't the only threat, they were all in danger. Emma's voice broke through his thoughts. "Please, David. I'm begging you. I never wanted this to happen. But now, I need your help." David stood there, frozen, as the magnitude of the situation sank in. His wife had been hiding a fugitive in their home. The very foundation of his life was crumbling before his eyes. What could he do now? Could he stand by her, even knowing what she had done? Or was he too far in, and had everything changed beyond repair? The man at the door seemed to sense David's hesitation. "We don't have much time, David. You need to make a choice. Right now. The longer you wait, the harder it will be for everyone." David's mind raced. He had to make a decision. Was he going to protect his family, or was he going to risk it all for the woman he loved? But in that moment, the only thing that was clear to him was that everything in his life, his marriage, his family, his trust, was now hanging in the balance. David's mind raced as he tried to process everything that had just happened. The man standing in his living room wasn't some random intruder, he was a part of something bigger, something much more dangerous than David could have imagined. His eyes locked onto Emma's, searching for answers, but all he saw was a woman utterly broken by the choices she had made. The betrayal stung deep, but it was the fear in Emma's eyes that gripped him the most. The man at the door didn't wait for David to make a decision. He stepped further into the room, his presence filling the space with an unnerving sense of authority. "You're not the first person to get caught up in this mess, David," he said, his voice dark and cold. "You're just the last person who can save her." David felt his heart beat faster, his pulse racing. His emotions were in turmoil, anger, confusion, betrayal, and even a sense of deep sympathy for Emma. How could he reconcile this with the woman he thought he knew? Was it possible to love someone and still find yourself on the edge of losing everything? "Who are you?" David asked, his voice shaking, but he couldn't let himself show weakness. Not now. Not when Emma needed him more than ever. The man narrowed his eyes. "I'm here to make sure things go smoothly. My boss wants to handle this quietly. No mess, no drama. But that means you've got to make a choice, right now. Emma can either turn him over, or she can be dragged into something far worse. David swallowed hard. Turn who over? What do you mean by that? Emma's face went pale, her breath shallow. David, please. I never wanted this for us, she whispered, her voice breaking. I just wanted to protect you, keep you safe. David couldn't understand. The words felt like a puzzle with pieces that just didn't fit together. He had always known Emma to be kind, caring, and loyal. But this? This was something else entirely. And now, her past was coming back to haunt them both. The stranger's presence in their home, the hidden fugitive, what kind of situation had she gotten herself into? The man smirked, clearly enjoying the power he held over them. You're still in the dark, huh? Well, let me help you out. Emma's been hiding a man named Thomas. He's a fugitive, a dangerous one. And she's been helping him stay under the radar. She's been protecting him for months. If you don't turn him over to us, she's going to pay for it. And so will you. David's breath caught in his throat. Thomas? He had never heard the name before. His mind raced, trying to piece together the fragments of this conversation, but nothing made sense. Why would Emma, of all people, protect someone like that? Was this some kind of mistake? Had he missed something all along? Why didn't you tell me, Emma? David asked, his voice strained, the hurt evident in his tone. Why keep something like this from me? Emma looked down, unable to meet his gaze. I was afraid, David. Afraid of what you would think, of what it would do to us. When I met Thomas, I had no idea what I was getting myself into. I thought he was just another guy in a tough situation. But it's not that simple. He's wanted by the authorities for something much worse than I ever imagined. And by the time I realized the truth, I was already too far in. He threatened me, David. And I couldn't risk losing you too. David took a deep breath, his thoughts swirling. The shock was almost overwhelming. He felt betrayed, yet at the same time, he could see the fear in Emma's eyes. He had to make a decision. He could either turn Emma in, let this dangerous criminal take her down with him, or he could protect her, stand by her side despite the risks. The man's voice broke through David's thoughts. Tick-tock, David. You've got one chance to make the right decision. You want to save your wife? Then you'll do exactly as I say. David clenched his fists, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. His instincts screamed at him to run, to escape with Emma and cut ties with everything that was happening. But there was a part of him, deep inside, that refused to give up on her. He loved her. Despite everything, he loved her. And now, she was asking him to make a choice. A choice that would determine the future of their family, and their lives. You've got to make a choice, David, Emma whispered, tears streaming down her face. Please, trust me. I never wanted to hurt you. I just didn't know how to get out of this. David looked at the man. His decision had to be made quickly. The stakes were too high, and every moment spent hesitating meant a step closer to losing everything he had fought for. He couldn't allow this criminal to tear apart his family, but he also couldn't let Emma face this alone. I won't let you take her, David said, his voice filled with determination. If she's done something wrong, we'll face it together. But I'm not turning her in. Not to you. The man's expression hardened. You'll regret this, he muttered. You have no idea who you're dealing with. But David wasn't backing down. The man could threaten him all he wanted, but Emma was his wife, and he would protect her, no matter the cost. Emma stepped closer to David, taking his hand in hers. Thank you, she whispered, her voice full of gratitude and fear. But I don't know how much longer we can keep running from this. I've made so many mistakes. We're in too deep, and I don't know how to get out." David looked at her, his heart aching for her, for the woman she used to be and for the woman she had become. He didn't have all the answers. He didn't know how they would survive this. But he was going to fight for her, for their life together, no matter what. The man turned to leave, his footsteps heavy on the floor. "You'll regret this decision, David. There's no going back now." As he walked out of the door. David's mind was filled with a mix of fear and resolve. He had made his choice. He had chosen Emma. But now, they were both in danger, more than ever before. And there was no turning back. The door slammed shut with a loud bang, and for a moment, everything was still. David stood frozen, his mind swirling with 100 conflicting emotions. The man's cold threat echoed in his ears. "You'll regret this decision, David. There's no going back now." David couldn't shake the feeling that their world had just shifted, the foundation of everything he knew crumbling beneath him. He looked at Emma, whose face was pale, her eyes brimming with tears. He wanted to comfort her, to hold her and tell her that everything would be okay, but the truth was, he didn't know if it would be. He didn't know if anything would ever be the same again. "David," Emma's voice was barely a whisper, filled with regret and fear. She reached out for his hand, her fingers trembling. "I'm so sorry. I never meant for any of this to happen. I thought I could handle it. I thought I could keep you safe." David squeezed her hand gently, but his thoughts were elsewhere. "What now? What's next?" "You didn't ask for any of this," he said quietly, his voice heavy. "But neither did I. I don't know what's going to happen next, Emma. But I'm here for you. I made a choice, and I'm not backing down." Emma looked up at him, her tear-streaked face showing a mix of gratitude and terror. "But you don't understand, David. This isn't just about Thomas. It's about the people he's involved with. The kind of people who won't hesitate to hurt anyone who gets in their way. If they find out we're hiding him." David could see the fear in her eyes, the same fear that had led her to make this choice in the first place. She had never wanted to drag him into this dangerous world, but here they were, with no way out. The weight of her secret was suffocating, and now, it was a burden they both had to carry. Suddenly, the sound of tires screeching outside broke the silence, followed by the unmistakable roar of a truck engine. David's heart raced as he moved to the window, his pulse quickening. Through the blinds, he could see the silhouette of a large black truck, its headlights blinding in the dark. It was parked across the street, the engine idling ominously. "Who is that?" David whispered, his stomach knotting. Emma's face turned ashen. "They've found us. They've come for him." David's breath caught in his throat. "No, this can't be happening." He spun around, grabbing Emma's arm. "We need to get out of here. Now." "But where will we go?" she pleaded, her voice shaking with panic. "We're trapped, David. I've been running for months. There's nowhere left to hide." David's mind raced. The stakes had just escalated to a level he wasn't prepared for. If they didn't act fast, if they didn't get out now, they might never get the chance again. "Listen to me, Emma," David said, his voice filled with urgency. "We can't just wait for them to come through that door. We have to leave. Now." But as he turned to grab their things, the sound of pounding on the door froze him in place. It was sharp, forceful, like the knock of someone who knew they were going to get what they wanted, no matter what. He motioned for Emma to stay quiet, his mind already working on a plan. Escape. Move fast. Get out of here before it's too late. David grabbed Emma's hand and pulled her toward the back door, but as he reached for the handle, the door slammed open with a force that shook the walls. Two men in dark clothing stormed into the room, their eyes scanning the area with calculated precision. "Looking for something?" one of them sneered, his voice dripping with menace. David's heart raced, adrenaline coursing through his veins. He knew he couldn't take them both on. His only hope was to get Emma out before things got even worse. "Where's Thomas?" the second man demanded, his voice low and threatening. "You think you can hide him forever?" David swallowed hard, trying to keep his voice steady. "I don't know who you're talking about." The man in front of him didn't flinch. "Don't play dumb. We know you're hiding him. The question is, how long do you think you can keep this up?" Emma stood frozen by his side, her eyes wide with terror. She knew what was coming. She had seen this before, had feared it for so long, and now, the inevitable was happening. Their secret was out. David's mind raced. There was no way they could get out of this without a fight. He could hear the sound of footsteps in the hall, the weight of it pushing down on him like a pressure cooker. They had no time to lose. He turned to Emma, his eyes filled with resolve. "We have to go. Now. I don't care where. Just away from here." Emma nodded, her breath coming in short gasps. She grabbed his arm and pulled him toward the back door, but before they could reach it, one of the men stepped forward, blocking their escape. "You're not going anywhere," he growled. "You're going to tell us where he is. And you're going to do it now." David stood his ground, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew he couldn't let them take Emma. He couldn't let them tear their lives apart. He had made a choice, and now he had to stand by it, no matter the cost. "You'll have to kill me first," David said, his voice firm, though fear gnawed at the edges of his words. "But you're not taking her." The man's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, the room seemed to hold its breath. The tension was unbearable, every second stretching longer than the last. Then, just as the man lunged forward, there was a sharp knock on the front door. The intruders froze. "Who the hell is that?" one of the men hissed, turning toward the door. David's pulse spiked. Who could be at the door now? Before anyone could react, the sound of a loud, commanding voice came through the door. "FBI. Open up." The FBI agent's voice echoed through the house, a lifeline that David hadn't expected. For a moment, everything stopped. The two men at the door looked at each other, confusion written all over their faces. The tension that had been suffocating them moments ago now hung in the air like an unspoken question. "FBI?" the first man asked incredulously, his eyes narrowing as he shifted his weight. "This is a mistake." David didn't wait for the men to respond. Grabbing Emma by the arm, he yanked her away from the door and pulled her toward the back exit. His heart raced, pumping adrenaline through his veins. The FBI could be the key to their escape, but he couldn't be sure. Could they trust these agents? Was this a setup? Before he could make another move, the men stepped forward, blocking the hallway. One of them, the larger of the two, drew a gun from his waistband. His eyes locked onto David with cold, lethal intent. "You're not going anywhere," the man growled. "We've been hunting Thomas for a long time. You think you can just walk away?" David's blood ran cold as the barrel of the gun was aimed directly at him. His body tensed instinctively, his mind racing for a plan, any plan, to survive. But then, the sound of more footsteps echoed from the front door. This time, there was no mistaking it. Multiple people. The men at the door glanced at each other, and their expressions shifted from cocky confidence to uncertainty. The FBI agent's voice rang out again, louder this time. "Put your hands where we can see them. Drop the weapon." David's heart pounded as he glanced over at Emma. Her face was pale, terror-stricken, but there was something else there now, hope. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but it was there. This was their chance. They had to act fast. The two men hesitated, giving David just enough time to pull Emma toward the back door. But as they neared the exit, a sharp voice called from behind them. "Don't even think about it." David froze. The voice came from the doorway leading into the kitchen. He turned slowly, his blood running cold. Standing in the doorway, blocking their only exit, was none other than Thomas. His eyes were wide, wild with panic, but there was no mistaking the familiar, unmistakable look of guilt that clouded his face. Thomas, the man they had been hiding for weeks, stood there with a gun in his own hand, pointed directly at David. "Thomas, no!" Emma screamed, her voice breaking as she rushed toward him. "What are you doing? This isn't you." Thomas didn't move, his expression torn between fear and determination. "You don't understand, Emma. They're coming for me. They're going to kill me." David's mind raced as he tried to process the situation. The men from outside were still closing in, and now Thomas, the very person they had tried to protect, was standing in their way. What had happened to the man they once knew? The man who had trusted them? The sirens outside had long since faded, but the weight of what had happened lingered in the house like an unshakable fog. David sat in the living room, his hands clasped tightly in his lap, staring at the place where the gun had once been. He had hoped for an end to the chaos, but it had only been the beginning of an entirely new set of struggles. Emma sat beside him, her face pale, eyes red from crying. The exhaustion was written in every line of her face. She had wanted to believe that saving Thomas would somehow lead to a happy ending, that the nightmare would stop. But instead, it had only spiraled further out of control, and now they were left to pick up the pieces. Across the room, Thomas sat with his hands cuffed, his shoulders slumped in defeat. The FBI agents had transported him to a nearby holding facility for questioning, but for now, he was still here, still part of the wreckage that David and Emma were trying to rebuild. He had been their friend. He had been Emma's brother. And yet, the man he had become was unrecognizable. A criminal. A fugitive. A danger to everyone around him. David had asked Emma to stay in the living room while the agents went over everything. She had wanted to be there with Thomas, to understand the man who had taken her life on this chaotic ride, but David knew she couldn't do that. Not now. Not when the pain was still too fresh. He turned to her, his voice soft but firm. "We need to talk about what happens next." Emma glanced at him, her eyes hollow. "What happens next? What else is there to talk about? Thomas is in custody. We were almost killed. Our lives are ruined." David could hear the raw emotion in her words, and he felt a surge of guilt and frustration. He understood her pain. He had watched as Thomas's lies and secrets unraveled everything they had worked for. He had hoped for something different. He had hoped for a solution, a way to save their lives from the wreckage. But nothing had gone the way they'd planned. But David wasn't ready to give up. He refused to let everything fall apart. There was still hope. There had to be. Thomas made mistakes. Huge mistakes, David said, his voice steady. But he's still a person, Emma. And what he did, it wasn't just his fault. It was all of us. We were all complicit, in our own way. Emma shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. "No, David. He's the one who got us into this. We didn't make the choice to hide him. We didn't make the choice to put ourselves in danger." "I know," David replied, his voice softening. "But we made the choice to trust him. We made the choice to bring him into our lives. And now, we have to live with that." The silence that followed felt suffocating. The weight of their decisions hung in the air like a thick fog, clouding their every thought. The world outside was quiet, the only sound the occasional passing car. But inside the house, it was as if time itself had stopped. After what felt like an eternity, Emma finally spoke, her voice small but determined. "So, what now? What do we do? How do we move on from this?" David took a deep breath, looking her in the eyes. "We don't move on. We learn from this. We face the consequences. We rebuild what we can. It wasn't the answer Emma had wanted to hear. But it was the only one that made sense. There were no easy solutions here. There was no way to undo the damage. But there was still a way forward. It would be painful. It would take time. But they could still find peace, even in the aftermath of chaos. Later that evening, after the agents had left, David found himself standing at the door to the room where Thomas had been placed. He had been told that Thomas would be transferred to a federal facility the following morning, but David couldn't let it go just yet. Not without hearing Thomas's side of the story, without understanding why he had done what he did. The door was open just a crack, and David knocked lightly before stepping inside. Thomas was sitting on the bed, his head in his hands. He didn't look up when David entered, but there was a sense of finality in the air. "David," Thomas's voice was barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry." David stood in the doorway for a moment, unsure of what to say. There was so much anger inside him, so much hurt. But there was also something else, a recognition that, despite everything, Thomas was still the person he had once known. The person he had called a friend. "You don't need to apologize to me," David finally said. "You need to apologize to Emma. To yourself." Thomas lifted his head slowly, his eyes filled with a mix of shame and sorrow. I know I've ruined everything. But I never wanted to hurt anyone. It just spiraled out of control." David nodded. "We all have choices, Thomas. You made yours, and now we all have to live with them." For a long time, neither of them spoke. There was nothing left to say that would fix things. Nothing could undo what had happened. But in that moment, David realized something that he hadn't been able to admit before. Despite everything, Thomas hadn't been the villain in this story. He had been a man caught in a system, in a world that didn't care about the people it trampled. And in some ways, they had all been trapped by the choices they'd made. As David turned to leave, Thomas spoke once more. "Will you tell her I'm sorry?" David didn't respond immediately. Instead, he paused at the door, looking back one last time. "I will," he said softly. "But it's going to take time, Thomas. Time for all of us." The next few weeks passed in a blur. The FBI's investigation continued, and David and Emma found themselves in a strange, liminal space. They were no longer the people they had been before this nightmare started. But they were also not yet the people they were becoming. The weight of the past hung over them like a shadow, but slowly, they began to rebuild. It wasn't easy. There were still nights where Emma would wake up, terrified, and David would find himself unable to escape the guilt. But together, they began to heal, each step forward feeling like a small victory. And through it all, David came to understand that redemption wasn't something that could be granted by others, it was something that had to be earned, through time, through understanding, and through the willingness to face the consequences of one's actions. In the end, it wasn't about what had happened, it was about what came next. And David was determined to make sure that whatever came next would be better than what had come before.